The following is a public preview of the New Models podcast. For our complete library, visit patreon.com/newmodels or newmodels.substack.com.
You're now listening to New Models.
Welcome to New Models. On this episode, we speak with American media theorist Douglas Rushkoff, author of such seminal books on digital culture as Cyberia, his 1993 portrayal of pre-millennial Bay Area counterculture, and Media Virus from 1994, which identified the logic of networked media a decade before the rise of social Web 2 platforms. More recently, Rushkoff is the author of Survival of the Richest, Escape Fantasies of the Tech Billionaires, and host of the podcast Team Human. There's perhaps no one better to speak about the evolution and de-evolution of our models for understanding the internet and networked media over the past 3 decades, because Doug has been one of America's best-known public media theorists throughout. We also hoped we might get to speak to Doug Rushkoff in the Aztec metaphysical sense of Doug Rushkoff, not as a singular entity, but a long sequence of every Doug Rushkoff at every moment extending through time, from his earliest years to the future. I'm Lil Internet, joined by my co-host Carly Busta. Our guest is media theorist Douglas Rushkoff. Let's get into it. I was listening to a talk of yours from 2009, and you used this line about free media or the free internet, and that the meaning of free was in the free market meaning of free. And I actually used basically the same device in a talk I gave 2 months ago, and I was very
15 years later
very surprised by that resonance.
Gotta
love it.
Yeah, but it's true.
Yeah, the fundamentals.
The free market type of free.
Yeah, that's what they did in the pretty early internet, just when they were trying to flip it from culture to business. They wrote this book, The Long Boom, which was arguing that thanks to the internet, the stock market and global economy was going to grow exponentially, uninterrupted forever. And in that book, I think that they interviewed Louis Rossetto, who is the founding publisher of Wired. And he said, like, open is good, closed is bad. Tattoo that on your forehead. And it sounded good to us like hippie people. Oh, open. We're going to be an open world. And they meant open markets, which is a totally different thing. But exactly. It's like free your mind, free your market.
And the rest will follow.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've gotten in the habit of blaming all of America's problems on Milton Friedman these days.
I know.
The idea of shareholder primacy is like, you walk into CVS now in the States and it's like, this is Milton Friedman's fault.
Yeah, but I've been reforming a little bit on that.
Really?
I mean, I used to blame the whole thing on that moment, on Wired Magazine and John Barlow and the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, and turning these tools from people tools into tools to use on people to extract value. But when I did that last book on the tech bros, I saw that there's something else in there too. There's this tendency of science and technology to try to reduce reality and subjugate women, back to that old Francis Bacon quote that I use too much, that science will let us take nature by the forelock and hold her down and submit her to our will. That's beyond capitalism, right? Capitalism is a tool, toward that. Yeah.
I appreciate this big scope, and it's part of the reason why we were excited to finally have you on the pod.
Oh, that's good to know. I wasn't sure if maybe you guys had never heard of me or didn't know who I was.
Oh my gosh, you're like a foundational figure for us.
Oh, that's good, because I'm always listening to it, and I'm thinking they would like what I have to say about this. So it's good to know that, we're mutual fans.
Thank you. I mean, you've been on this short list for like 7 years.
7 years, exactly.
But it's like this moment felt really, really right.
It felt really right. And the person we spoke to prior to you was Orit Halpern, who is a scholar in Dresden. And her thing is smartness. And why do we take it as a naturally occurring part of human evolution that there is AI in this specific form? Machine learning in this specific form. And we're really interested in pulling back those layers.
Yeah.
And you're this unique mind who's been able to very effectively communicate what network media is, what digital culture is, since it's more or less birthed in the public sphere.
And it's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about that sense of inevitability we all have, about them reaching AGI and some kind of great artificial intelligent future. And I've started to see the deregulation, free market, accelerationist tech bros much less as change agents than as extraordinarily reactionary forces. That the reason they want to do it so quickly, so fast, is to preserve themselves and their own monopolies. If this went slowly in a distributed way with lots of people participating, then these technologies might end up some form of distributed intelligence. They might end up with multiple intelligences, but they want there to be really one very particular intelligence. When they talk about, we've got to accelerate this technology so that we can upload our consciousness before the world ends, before the event comes, that's because they want to upload their consciousness exactly as it is.
Right.
It's the most narcissistic thing. It's not about humanity evolving to the next state of consciousness. It's about locking down exactly their state of consciousness and preserving that forever. But yeah, once I started to see them as reactionary rather than change agents, rather than catalysts, it all became really clear. They want to preserve business as usual, that whatever new invention, whatever new technology we have, it's all fine and good as long as it supports exponential growth of capital in the most traditional way possible.
Right.
My personal motto recently has been the singularity is a death cult, because I've been thinking about how much these ideas are really just based on faith. They're essentially religious ideas. Even the idea that your consciousness, your sense of self exists purely inside your brain, and a digital copy of it would persist in some way or would give you the same experience, that the body is like a vestigial organ, essentially. The copy problem, it's kind of a unsolvable paradox.
What's the copy problem?
There's no way to know that if you perfectly copied the data inside someone's brain, if that consciousness would be continuous with the one before, or even exist in the same way,
totally
right?
Disembodied understanding of self.
It's based on just pure faith that it would even work to upload a consciousness, And I've also been thinking of them as religious zealots. And of course, it also just ties into like Christian eschatology in the first place. Teilhard de Chardin's Omega point preceded the idea of the singularity as a Christian eschatological framework of all things complexifying into Christ consciousness.
Yeah. There's a few different angles on that I've thought a lot about. One is, what you're talking about is the Dr. McCoy problem. Whenever they would beam Dr. McCoy down to a planet on Star Trek, he'd always be upset. He didn't know whether, as he transported down from the spaceship and been reconstituted on the planet, or has a copy of him been created with all the same memories, and he would have no way of knowing. And if you lose that continuity of awareness, then what is that? Now, the tech bros would say there is no continuity of awareness. This is a simulation. And in terms of the religion, this goes back to my earliest cyber pundit days, when I was invited to my first important people parties. Back in the early 90s, I met Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and all basically the clients of this one agent, John Brockman.
The central metaphor of our time is computation.
And I was at this party at Brockman's apartment, and they were picking on Naomi Wolf, who, at the time wasn't as controversial. And they were picking on her because she was talking about spirituality, and they were really just laughing at her. And I started to defend her because they were presenting a completely materialist understanding of the universe. It's part of his whole God delusion, hatred of spirituality. And I was trying to bring, at least what I had from college into that discussion a little. Wittgenstein and the idea of how we make meaning together. And if you believe that we live in an evidence-based universe, well, that's also a presumption. You don't really have evidence that we live in an evidence-based universe. It's a way of thinking. And so I was trying to offer something other than what they were saying, which is that consciousness simply has to be an emergent property of matter getting more complex. And I was trying to say that you guys are kind of using a Desjardins hand wave, that okay, matter gets really complex and then consciousness emerges, and they use the word emergence is no better than the word creation, in terms of this change of state to this new thing that's emerged out of it. And I was trying to offer, what if consciousness precedes matter? What if consciousness launched matter? It's no more or less probable than a Big Bang or anything else. And it was strange. And at those, I didn't know who he was at the time, but at some of those same gatherings was Jeffrey Epstein, who was funding a lot of this way of thinking about the world.
No way.
Yeah. And it made sense that Epstein would fund not only, emergent property kind of people and genetics people and how do you spread your genotype and phenotype and mimetic type continuously, because that's that colonizer model. But he would fund sort of these scientific atheists, because if you're going to be that way to other people, you need evidence that there's no karma, that other humans, they're just flesh. They're just, consciousness is an illusion perpetrated by their DNA. So, their subjugation and suffering doesn't really matter on any moral level. And it kind of all started to make sense to me as, that's the universe they want to live in.
Wow. And that was like circa 95?
Yeah, that was 95, 96. Yeah.
Incredible.
When I was the new kid on the block, before they knew.
I mean, now that we have the small talk out of the way.
Oh yeah, are we recording?
Yeah. The singularity is the death cult is my new how's the weather over there?
Yeah, but death cult is the way to phrase it, though. I mean, it's like pharaoh religion. It's the pyramid. It's these are the death cult. This is, we got taught this in Torah and Talmud and Quran and everything else. This kid Joseph having these dreams ends up teaching the pharaoh about debt, which creates slavery and enslaves his own people for 400 years, building the pyramids, building the death cult. And we just keep doing it.
So I was trying to think, this podcast might have been in the making since I saw a copy of your 1994 book, Media Virus, on my dad's desk at age 12. And I never forgot the cover of it. Then I also remembered that in 2010, when I was living in Bushwick and I picked up a signed copy of your book, Coercion, at a moving sale. And this copy of Coercion is one of the few objects that made it all the way here to Berlin. I think probably 98% of my material life from the United States.
You have one box of your possessions.
Wow, I made the
this
short
happens
list.
to have.
Dang.
Yeah, but inside it's a signed copy and it says, "To Jen, think of me thinking of loving you. Love, Douglas Rushkoff, 9/1/1999." And of course that Jen is Genesis P. Orridge, and it was their moving sale where I picked it up, and I thought it might be a little trippy, at least for you to
see your own handwriting.
It's weird. 91999, all that's kind of interesting, and it's funny because I just did last night. They did the premiere of "She Is Here," She Is Still Here,
cool.
the Genesis P. Orridge documentary, and at the Roxy in Manhattan. And I did the after talk because the filmmaker couldn't make it. So they had me and David Hershkovitz from Paper Magazine that interviewed me about my friendship with Genesis. And we started talking about all the magical synchronicities and things that are happening. So it's interesting that we get to that this morning. Yeah.
I'm curious about the thinking and countercultural activity that preceded or took place in the really early years of the internet that you feel really anticipated what was to come.
Early years of like the World Wide Web, like sort of the 90s social.
Yeah, I mean, really just the public use of the internet. And I'm thinking particularly of Genesis P. Orridge's Temple of Psychic Youth, as well as The Process, which had members of Skinny Puppy involved. But I mean, this could also include Robert Anton Wilson's Quantum Psychology, or even Burroughs' Cut-Ups. I mean,
it's like protocols. He's like social protocols, anticipate it kind of.
I'm curious what the imaginary was at that time, because I think we forget that the 80s and 90s felt like this general intensification of media and connection, while now like media is essentially just media on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, there were shades of interactivity that started in the late 60s with, for me, it was like New York experimental theater companies that broke the fourth wall. So the living theater and open theater and touching the audience and starting that
Happenings.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Alan Capro and Happenings and then Fluxus. And that went along with a certain kind of anti-capitalism. I'm not the producer and you're the consumer. We're collaborating somehow in a more egalitarian thing. We're going to break all that down. You know, we also got new styles of learning. You know, how is the kid participating in the learning? Cooperative enterprises, the stuff the Panthers were doing economically and socially was sort of like, oh, this is sort of breaking down the consumerist way of relating, even employer-employee, you know, breaking down into collectives. So there was that. And then, I mean, for me as like a suburban kid, it was the television remote that changed so much. In the old days, the television had a dial that you would turn. If you wanted to change the channel, you know, there's only like 4 or 5 tops anyway. But if you wanted to change the channel, you would turn the dial, then you would fine tune the station to get it in as good as possible, and then adjust these rabbit ear antenna to the new channel, unless you were like wealthy and had an antenna on the top of roof of a private house. It was this operation. But, you know, as we moved to the remote control, then you could just sort of sit in the couch and change the channel. I mean, I kind of had a profound sense of shift that we were moving to this cut and paste reality, that instead of sitting through a program and being drawn up the Aristotelian incline plane of anxiety so that you could be programmed by either a marketer or a content maker, you know, you could surf away when things got tense and come back later. So the experience of watching TV by the early 70s was no longer watching a television show, but watching television. At least to those of us who were slightly media savvy, you know, we broke the spell of the individual programmer and started to look at the whole thing. It was that more Beavis and Butthead feeling of watching TV. Change it. This sucks. Change it. You know, then the way our parents did. So the kids who were like that either discovered early computers. You would plug in this Radio Shack device into the TV. So you were doing something on the TV. It changed the sanctity of Dan Rather's space.
That's so true.
You know, it used to be a magic act. It was like transubstantiation. Who was ever in that magic box in the living room must have the voice of God. Right now, if you can type on that thing or play video games on that thing, you know, the joystick, you know, the remote control deconstructed the content of television. The joystick then demystified the pixel, and then the computer keyboard and the mouse turned it into a DIY space where now I could express myself through that thing. And those stages were interesting to me because then you could kind of trace it through Burroughs and Genesis. But there were so many other things happening at the same time. The psychedelic revival was kind of a DIY, design your own reality. Fantasy role-playing games were part of that. I mean, for me, it was theater, chaos math, and new physics, and all the dancing woolly masters, and all these ideas that we are hallucinating reality, or what we believe can actually happen. The emergence of sigil magic, comic books is something taken seriously because comic books have that magical sigil quality, and then piercing and body modification, and they were all part of the same reclamation. The camcorder, I wrote a lot about in Media Virus about Rodney King and the power of that moment. It wasn't that he was the first black guy getting beaten by white cops. It's the first one we captured on home video. Totally. And that led to a sense of almost inevitability that anything we capture is going to get expressed. And then we saw this sort of viral recombinant media styles of Madonna and Michael Jackson and, people who were adjusting themselves, reinventing themselves, not to fool anybody, but as part of this sort of recombinant refashioning of everything.
I mean, that's so true in terms of Madonna and authenticity. It's like she changed in front of us so many times.
That also could be traced back to Bowie, right?
Sure, Bowie, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Sorry.
It's just great to embed this in a long...
I love this. Exactly. Art historians will focus, and I come from an art history background, will focus a lot on the proto-network logic of Capro and the, as you say, like experimental theater at that time, and then Fluxus, but it's not really connected to the present. I feel like Kay Alado McDowell has done a really good job taxonomizing media. And one of the sections that they talk about is immersive media. And it didn't really click for me, that part. I thought, the Family of Man exhibition was this nonlinear exhibition at MoMA that had photographs in all different places, and the visitor wasn't didactically told what to look at next. They had to choose it themselves. But you speaking about the transformation of the TV into something that you can intervene on through the remote control by saying you're not watching TV show, you're watching television as this space, the way we might think of network space now. And the joystick, I can imagine that being tied up with an American identity of democracy and soft power, like, in Soviet Union, they have only one or two channels and they must watch it. But in America, we can turn our TVs into spaces of determination, and how powerful that must have been, and how important that these things were already activated in the 70s and certainly by the 80s and 90s when you start writing.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of why I left theater to do internet-y stuff. I was a theater director till I was 33. That was my main job. Theater had just become sort of for rich people, to substitute for social action. So they would say, do you care about the AIDS crisis? Oh yeah, I saw the play. Right. So if they sat through 5 hours of Angels in America, it meant they've paid their debt to the AIDS crisis. It's like, and because of also the rigidity of the proscenium and the kind of theater people wanted was way closer to Neil Simon than to Alan Capro or Joseph Chaikin. And then the internet was starting, and it seemed like, this will be the place where artists can do this other thing we're talking about, can break things down and challenge existing hierarchies and systems. But it so quickly became the opposite. I mean, by 1999, when I wrote the book that you've got there, that Coercion book, I was like, this is over. It was in 93 when I wrote Cyberia. I said, there's a window of opportunity here, and it's not going to be open that long for us to use this stuff to do the things that these crazy kids are talking about. But then it could so easily become it's what I wrote in 99 in Coercion. I said that when we're interacting with programmed platforms, it's a feedback loop, and they are going to turn us into much more extreme versions of what we already are. So I was really explaining the MAGA social justice split in advance, because once the algorithm knows what we want, it's going to feed that back to us. And basically, that's what I was asking, what's going to happen when the marketer and the social programmer, when they import the algorithms of slot machines or direct marketing onto these platforms? It's not going to be pretty. And that's where we've got, the internet is not dominated by the ethos of Ars Electronica, but today. But there's something that could be emerging, particularly as we're less scientific about it and a little bit more occult. I feel like we're understanding now that occultism isn't like magic, supernatural, the secret, believing crazy shit, but that magic is much closer to Burroughs and Geisen and power, and it's something else.
Yeah, I recently gave a talk in Vienna where I spoke a bit about early internet, like cyber occult culture, and how a lot of their frameworks and language for describing the phenomena that happen on the internet, in a way, are still the best way to describe these things. Magic has always been formalizing a system for engaging with agentic symbols and a symbolic world that is able to change and affect reality. And essentially, the internet is literally that. It's like a GUI for the noosphere, or a symbolic realm that is directly now pervasively, constantly changing our reality and affecting what is going to happen in the future. And now, of course, with machine learning, the amount of agency it has is intensely amplified. So it's a really natural language to look towards to help us describe these phenomena, because there's just so much in common with what magic has always been and how the internet functions as a technology.
Yeah, language has become...
If you're hearing this message, you've completed the first step towards becoming a New Models member. To continue, visit patreon.com/newmodels or newmodels.substack.com. A complete library containing hundreds of rare New Models episodes awaits.